Today we are looking at the Minari 180 flash starter. We will be disassembling it, inspecting, greasing it, and putting it all back together again. Pull the starter rope a few times, then note the location at which the starter rope comes out of the starter housing. Then take a Sharpie and mark this location. Turn the starting unit on its end, exposing the pawls and the pawl retainer clip. Using a pair of pliers, remove the pawl retainer clip. Remove the starter pawls. Now lift off the pawl cover. Inspect the pawls as well as the pawl cover for any wear and tear. Note the location of any washers you may encounter. Flip the starter over. Note that the new version of the Minari flash starter has 2 screws to retain the post, whereas the previous version of the same starter only had 1. Separate the starter housing from the pulley, exposing the post. Using a 3mm hex bit, remove both screws. Be careful not to strip the heads, as both screws are factory installed with quite a bit of blue thread locker to avoid them backing out. The post has now been removed. Be careful not to get any grease into these 2 little holes in the steps that will follow. Otherwise, the blue thread locker which you'll be adding at the end will not stick. For the next steps, be sure to be wearing safety glasses as well as gloves. Using a pair of pliers, remove the rewind spring, that is the thinner of the 2 springs. Inspect the housing for any wear and tear, then flip it over to expose the flash spring. Again, by using eye protection, gloves, and a pair of pliers, pull out the flash spring starting from the middle. Neither the flash spring nor the rewind spring are under significant tension, but you still want to be careful removing these. Clean the housing from both sides. Then inspect for any damage, wear or tear. Clean and degrease the flash spring. Inspect for corrosion or any other damage. Then do the same for the rewind spring. Also clean and inspect the post. You can see that I'm not using the green friction tape that was factory installed. It actually started bunching up on me a few weeks ago, coming out of the housing and preventing the starting mechanism from working. We will be replacing the friction tape with a lot of grease at a later step. This next step is by far the most difficult out of all of the steps presented, and that is to get the flash spring back into its housing. At first I wanted to lubricate the starter spring and put it back in its housing. However, that proved to be too difficult. It was too slippery to get any significant control over the spring, so I ended up degreasing the spring again to get more friction and controlling it. That worked well using clamps and other gadgets and devices, but it was frustrating. It took quite a while and quite a few attempts to get the flash starter back into its housing. You may want to try your own techniques of what works best for you to accomplish this task. The most promising method of getting the flash spring back into its housing is to start working from the outside, pushing inwards. You may also want to try a vise or various other devices to help you accomplish this. Because I had decreased the flash spring in order to get it back into its housing, now is the time to add copious amounts of white lithium grease all over the spring and housing to reduce friction when turning the engine over. Put white lithium grease all over the spring retainer as well as all over the rewind spring. Line up the rewind spring in its housing starting at the bent end, which goes into its retainer, starting from the outside, working your way in. This is a very easy task, just remember to keep positive pressure on top of the spring. Assemble the post, ensuring that all washers that you may have removed are back in place. Put the post back in its housing and with a screwdriver ensure that the bent end of the spring engages in the slot of the post. Turn the pulley enough revolutions for the mark on the starter rope to line up with the edge of the housing. Set the starter pulley into the starter housing. Next, align the notch in the pawl retainer with the flash spring and insert the pawl retainer onto the pulley. Add both starter pawls. Place the pawl retainer clip over both starter pawls and using a blunt object, such as a punch for example, push the clip into position, locking it in place with the post. Flip the starting mechanism over and align both screw holes. Put blue thread locker on both screws and tighten in place. Make sure you use the thread locker, otherwise the assembly may disassemble in flight. Pull the starting mechanism a few times, making sure everything is running smoothly before assembling it back onto your machine. Thank you for watching.